I moved to Fox Point when I was 4 years old. I lived on Brook Street, lived in a 3-decker house with people that we knew. It was a very interesting situation because we lived right in the mid of the Cape Verdean Portuguese community. My family's Cape Verdean, and it was really at that time, when they say it takes a village to raise a child, it really did at that time. I mean, we didn't lock our doors. We were in and out of each other's houses, and it was just a wonderful community of families. And I'm so happy that I grew up in Fox Point.
Did people come from the same areas, the same?
Oh, no. Fox Point was very diverse. I mean, I have a document at the Cape Verde Museum that my grandfather, his green card from 1917, that showed he lived on Wickenden Street, and he had been in America for 18 years. He came from Cape Verde on a whaling ship. People came, as you know, Cape Verde Islands is made up of several islands, and so are the Azores. So you may have had Azorians and people from the mainland Portugal and Cape Verdeans in Fox Point, but they came from different islands. And you had Armenians, you had Irish, the Irish people were prevalent in Fox Point. Some of the stores were owned by Irish people. And so Fox Point was really diverse. You had Native American, I mean, we had just everybody in Fox Point. But of course, but we each kind of kept within our own enclaves too. There was a Portuguese church that was a Catholic church. There was a Irish church that was a Catholic church. There was the Cape Verdean Protestant church, the Sheldon Street church that my family went to. And although everyone was welcome, basically you had people of that religion and nationality going to those churches.
So why did people settle in Fox Point?
Well, my people settled in Fox Point because they came by the sea. And around this time of year, in the 1940s and 50s, schooners, I'll give you a little history, when the no longer needed whaling ships that left from Providence and New Bedford because they discovered oil, those whaling ships were turned into schooners. And the schooner is a ship that carries people, mail, and goods. And the Cape Verdeans, and in fact, it was a man from Fox Point, Mr. Coelho, was the first one to buy one of those ships and to go to Cape Verde to bring people back and forth. So we came on our own ships. Portuguese also came on ships to Fox Point. And since we're, islands, Fox Point was right on the water. It was a familiar type of area to live in. And people could find jobs. They worked as, men worked as longshoremen. They worked in the oyster. There was an oyster factory in Fox Point at one time. Shucking oysters, they worked. And my grandfather worked in a coal yard at one time. I mean, they could always find some kind of work there in Fox Point.
What was the main focus of the communities around the churches, or were there other kinds of institutions
there
and
were
events?
churches, and there were also fraternal organizations. There was the Portuguese had a band club, and they were really into the music and the band music. Cape Verdeans had organizations based on the island that they came from, or just friendships, and there was the Boys and Girls Club. At that time, it was the Boys Club when I was a kid.
Right.
And basically, it was a real asset for the boys. They would go swimming. They would play basketball. The girls who had older brothers also participated in the Boys Club. I think it was one day a week. I didn't have any older brothers, so I never really went to the Boys Club. My mother wouldn't let me go to the Boys Club. There's too many rough boys there, she said, And also we had, at that time, where the Fox Point School is now, Gregorian School, it was a big park. And that was a place we would go and play and run around and play games. And it was a nice open area for those of us who lived in the tenements, So Fox Point was a fun place to be.
What about shops? Where would you go to buy things?
Oh, Wickenden Street. Wickenden Street had fish market. There was on Pike, I think it was on Pike Street. There was a place where you could buy a chicken. It was a live chicken. You'd go in, you could buy chicken and eggs. They killed the chicken in the back and hear it squawking. It was not a nice thing to do. But there was a fish market. There was a grocery store, small grocery store on Wickenden Street. There was a drugstore, Tierney's drugstore. There were, I mean, and then, you know, we were very close to Thayer Street. We walked to Thayer Street, and I took ballet lessons downtown. I walked down Benefit Street and down to the city. We walked all over the place at that time. Not too many of us had cars in Fox Point. In fact, I think there were 7 houses together, 7, you know, 3 in my house and 4 apartments next door with 2 stores downstairs. And in those houses, I believe there were only 2 gentlemen who had cars, automobiles. And the gentleman who lived downstairs from us, his name was Mr. Edmonds. He would once about, I guess, every 2 weeks or so, he would take the ladies in his car to the Big Bear Market, which was, I think, closer to Bassett Street. And they would buy all their meats for the week or the 2 weeks. And during World War II, my family had the only telephone for 7 families. So we had a party line. So we would get calls for the whole 7 families in that house. It was really a communal type of situation.
Did people ever go out to eat?
Not really, mostly because we had such good cooks. I mean, the man upstairs from me, he was a cook. I mean, he worked in a factory, but he really was a good cook. And he worked nights. My mother and many of the other women, especially the Cape Verdean women, they worked in jewelry factories. Some of the women worked in cleaning the dormitories at Brown University. And so they would be gone during the day. In those days, we didn't get lunch in school. We came home for lunch. And so the man upstairs, his name was Domingo Valls. We called him Mush. Okay, we have these wonderful nicknames for Cape Verdean people. And he would cook a big pot of whatever for his kids. He had 6 kids. And for me, because I was, at that time, I was an only child, so my brother was born 7 years later. And we all sat around the table and came home for lunch and ate. And, you know, it was good food. Sometimes we didn't always like the food, but, you know, when you're a kid, you want, I guess, more ordinary food. But he was really a good cook. And many of the people in our neighborhood were good cooks. So, man next door worked for Crescent Park in the Chowder House. And he would bring home clam cakes sometimes, you know. So, yeah, well, we did go out to eat. My father was a merchant seaman, and he was gone a lot. So when he came in from, when he came ashore after a long trip, he would take my mother and I, and then my brother up to Federal Hill. That was the big treat, to go to Federal Hill, to go to one of the Italian restaurants.
So when did you decide to become a librarian?
Well, okay. In 1972, I was working for an organization called the Providence Corporation. And that's when we were beginning to open up about diversity. We didn't even use the word diversity at that time. And I was working with a man called Charlie Forts, and we were working with Charlie. I can't remember Charlie's last name. He was a director at the library. We were working on opening up programs for a diverse group of people, including Black people, Cape Verdean people, Hispanic people, whatever. And there was a librarian in Fox Point. I was not trained as a librarian, but I had worked with libraries in the past. And she was married to a man who went, well, anyway, she left. And Charlie asked me if I would like to be a librarian. work at the library. I was a little skeptical, but he said, no, we need your skills. We need your people skills. We need the things that you can bring to the library. So I started working at Fox Point, I think it was 1972, under Helen Doolin, who was a wonderful, wonderful person. And the children's librarian, her name just escaped me for a while. She had gotten, we call them grants now. I don't know if they call them grants, but she had gotten funding to start a program called the Child Learning Center, CLC. And it was in Fox Point. And so, although I was a librarian, I was also monitoring and developing programs that were outside of the sphere of the ordinary library at that time. That's when libraries were opening up and we were doing more things in the community. And that's what I had done in the Providence Corporation. So that's how I got into library services.
So what were you most proud of from your years with the library?
I am most proud of the people that I'm very proud of the relationship we formed with the school. We really had, in Fox Point, one of the first real library liaisons between the school and the library. Because of the proximity of the school, we had classes coming over to the library. They didn't have a very good library at the school. We had classes practically every day. We had wonderful relationships with wonderful teachers at Fox Point, really caring teachers at Fox Point. Fox Point was the only school at that time that was completely ramped. So you had a lot of kids that had disabilities. Those teachers were wonderful. We had kids in wheelchairs. We had kids that we had to carry into the library. I didn't, but the aides had to carry them in. And we just had a wonderful time. The teachers would tell us what topics they were doing, and we'd get the books from all over the city. And some of the other libraries said, how do you have such a high circulation for such a small library? Because we had good relationships with the neighborhood. And also, people didn't realize, they thought of Fox Point only as that small enclave that we had, as you said. But we had a lot of people from the East Side who had ties to Brown University. So we had older graduate students that came from all different countries that really enriched what we did. We had a program, we had some Asian women came in and cooked for us, or they cooked and brought us the food. And we had Russians who had lived in a high rise, and they came in and they taught us Russian words. Sandy told you, she learned how to say book in Russian, but yet. And so we didn't know, these people, the Russians would order the books. We didn't know what the books were. So Sandy would just call on the phone and say, but yet. And they would come to the library and get their books. So I'm very proud of the scope of clientele we had in Fox Point. We had all the kids that came to the Boys Club. They came to the Boys Club from all over the city, and they became library users. In fact, just this week, I've heard from two I call them my library kids. I've heard from two of my library kids this week. So I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of the fact that wherever I go in the city, I'll meet kids who are, now some of them from senior citizens, right? that I knew in the library. And they always tell me what a wonderful place it was, a safe place it was, because we really adhered to rules in Fox Point. In fact, and I didn't have to enforce all the rules. Sandy didn't have to enforce the rules. The kids enforced the rules on themselves. They would come to the door and they would stop and they would walk across the library. Miss Smart doesn't let you run in the library. And and somebody else would write, no, you can't run in the library, And so we made it a safe, happy place for the kids. And we sometimes protected. I even protected kids from their own sisters and brothers who were kind of bullies. I'm proud of that. I'm proud. Yeah. And one of the things I'm proud of is, kid said to me once on the phone, "You were always fair. You were fair to everybody who was there." And I like that he said that.
That's great. Yeah, that's what you want to be.
Try anyway.
Yeah, right.
And Sandy and I worked very well together. I mean, we had other people come and go. We had different children's specialists come and go. But Sandy and I always worked together. We always had each other's back. And even if she said something that I didn't quite agree with, I wouldn't argue with her in front of people. And the same thing with her. And we had, like I said, we had a variety of people who worked with us, the children's specialists. We always tried, and sometimes we had people who were a little, how can I say, they didn't always agree with the way we did things at Fox Point, but we would try to work with them so that I always try to find out what was their best assets and work with them. I'll give you an example. Joe DeMora, I love Joe. Joe's a good friend of mine. He came to us from South Providence. Now, Joe is 6'7". He was born in Cape Verde Islands, and Joe came to us and he loved the kids. He went to Fox Point School. And at 6'7", it was very difficult for him to shelve books, especially the books on the lower shelf. So, I mean, I could see him struggling. So I said, Sandy, we can't let him shelve books. For one thing, you know, it was difficult. So we found other things that Joe could, you know, just do. And Sandy, and he always said, Sandy, always shelve my books. He was great at reading to the kids. And if you can imagine this 6'7" dark-skinned guy on the floor with the kids all around him reading books, it was wonderful. Yeah. We had other, you know, other children's specialists who were really into arts and crafts, but didn't always know how to include the book into the craft. We had to kind of ease them. No, you can't just do this. You have to connect it to the books and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think Sandy and I, we're a good team. We kind of nurtured people. We nurtured all the people that worked there.
Do you think that Fox Point, the neighborhood, changed?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it changes every day. I mean, every time I go down there, there's a new restaurant. I walk down, rode down Wigginton Street this Sunday, and all the restaurants and places have changed, except for Peaceable Kingdom, which is still there, which is run by wonderful people who really were supportive of the library. It's a neighborhood, but it's also always been a neighborhood in flux. And it's lost a lot of its, the type of people that are living in Fox Point now, I think are more young people connected to colleges and people who work at Brown or Johnson Wales or RISD. And I think that they're not, how can I put it? They've replaced the working class people who lived there before. When we lived there, there were people who worked in factories, people who worked in the cleaning departments at Brown University or in the kitchens at Brown University. Now you have more professional folks. I don't know if that makes that much of a difference. I will say I'm very proud of John Gonsalves, who was the city councilman from Fox Point. He was one of my kids. When I talk about Fox Point of my youth, I really talk about community. And I tell people, I went to the Sheldon Street Church, and the people who taught Sunday school were my neighbors. The people who, I mean, I learned how to, looking around, I learned how to sew. I learned from my mother too, but I learned how to sew at the Sheldon Street Church. And that's when I first learned about giving to the community, was at the church there. And I think that's an important part of Fox Point is people helping each other. And one thing is, between our house and the house next door, there was a clothesline. And if the lady on the next door needed something, she would call my mother, and we had a bag. We'd pin it to the clothesline and send it across. So if she needed an orange for something or a salt or sugar, we'd put it in the bag and we'd send it across the clothesline. And I always thought of that as typically a Fox Point thing to do. I don't know if it is, but it was in our little enclave, Fox Point thing to do. And you know, I didn't have any older brothers, but there were two boys upstairs. They were my older brothers. They teased the heck out of me, but nobody else could tease me. And across the way, there were a family with two even older brothers, and they watched out for you. My mother worked during the day, coming home from school. The older women would sit in the windows and they would watch out for us. So there was a lot of community and community pride. And when my grandfather lived on Pike Street, and he was older and not well after my grandmother died. And so I would bring him supper at night. I was maybe 9 years old. And I would get to the corner of Wickeden Street, which was, still had the tracks. It didn't have the trolleys, but still had the tracks at that time. And so the guys would come out of the bar and they say, "Wait, Fonnie." And they wait, and they said, and they called it "Cross Me the Street." And they would wait, and they said, "Okay, cross the street." And I bring my food to my grandfather, and they wait there for I come back. He said, "Now you wait on the other side of the street. Don't cross the street until we come out." And I'd be very stern about it, but lovingly stern. And then they'd wait until I came out, and I'd stand there, and one of them would see me, and they'd say, "Okay," and they'd stop the traffic and cross me the street. And I did this all the time. It was just an example of how people kind of looked out for one another.